Last night we got the last 3 episodes of Ironheart, so today we're going to talk through the tragedy of Riri Williams. Hi, my name is Sean, and I love to talk about movies and TV way too much. With that in mind, go ahead and join me down below in the comment section. Let me know, what did you think about Ironheart Season 1? With where it ends, it does seem like they're teasing a Season 2. Will we ever get it? I don't know, but it's teased, so let's say Ironheart Season 1. With that said, let's dive straight into the tragedy of Riri Williams. And watching through Ironheart, I was pretty frustrated throughout much of the series, and it became very clear what my frustration was in the final sequence of the show. That I didn't understand what I was watching. Didn't necessarily change my experience and enjoyment of the show, but understanding what I was watching informed my interpretation of everything that came before, and the final sequence, in particular, the final moment of the show, makes it clear that Ironheart is a tragedy. It is the tragedy of Riri Williams. It's not her redemptive arc, it's not her origin story, it's the tragedy of her succumbing to some of her worst tendencies and being unable to overcome her trauma. And what I mean by all of this, if you go all the way back to Aristotle's Poetics, something I'm probably not qualified to talk on in any great amount of detail, but Aristotle's Poetics, one of the great philosophers, and he wrote something called Poetics, that is essentially one of the original works discussing drama. And he broke down poems or stories into 2 big genres: comedies and tragedies. And when he says comedies, he's not defining it the way we define comedies. It's a much broader category. It's not just the funny stuff, though he did mean that too, but it was defined broader than that, where in a comedy, you have a character triumphs over adversary. They learn, they grow, they change, and they're triumphant in the end. Even if they have faults that lead them into folly and causes trouble and drama for them, ultimately they're triumphant in the end. That's what a comedy is. A tragedy is bad things fall upon them, and they don't learn and they don't grow. They're not able to overcome it, and so in the end, you have a sad ending. And so in broader context, you can have a character that maybe they have big victories throughout the story, but they're never able to grow and overcome their central flaw. And usually you come to a moment where they could end on top of the world if they would just turn around and stop. But they keep going, and they don't learn, and ultimately it leads to their downfall. If you go through a number of Scorsese's films, they're about the rise of these kind of empires, whether Wolf of Wall Street, Goodfellas, whichever one you want to go with, there's the rise and there's like the peak of this criminal empire where if the characters would stop, if they would learn, grow, change, stop, they would end on top of the world. But they can't stop. They can't overcome their central flaw, and it ultimately leads to their downfall. You can look at the show Breaking Bad. It's the tragedy of Walter White, that he has great gifts, and you're watching the potential rise of this incredible empire, and you reach several points in time and you go, he could stop right here, incredibly rich. He got away with it, but he can't stop. He keeps going, he keeps pushing, and it ultimately leads to the downfall of everything. And it's not obvious that you're watching a tragedy while you're watching Ironheart until the final moment. You think you're watching a bit of her origin story, a bit of kind of not full-blown redemptive arc, but the character arc that she needs to truly become a hero. And the final scene makes it clear that's not the case. This is the tragedy. What do I mean by that? The show makes it abundantly clear that she is traumatized by the death of her friend and her stepfather, and this perpetually haunts her. And she grew up in a less than stellar neighborhood without financial resources, and that's something that kind of informs her worldview constantly. And so we pick up in the story where you have someone that intellectually has all the gifts in the world. And so she's been discovered via news, discovered by the government, discovered by Wakanda, given a grant at a school that is giving her tremendous opportunity at a very young age and access to resources. But she's so haunted by her past that she's obsessed with this one project, and she has faults, that she's impulsive, she's in a rush, she doesn't know how to ask for help, and so she keeps trying to cut corners to rush to achieve her goal that's tied to her trauma of her past. Thus, this leads to her getting kicked out of MIT, an incredible opportunity that would almost certainly set her up for success if she could work within the reasonable parameters, but she cuts corners, she turns to unethical means rather than being patient because she's so in a rush because of this trauma from her past. And then she goes back home, and she still doesn't know how to open up to her mother. She doesn't know how to ask for help. She doesn't know how to be patient. She does not learn from that. And so in her impatience, once again, now she turns to crime in order to build this thing that's tied to the trauma of her past. And so not just unethical means to resource things, truly becomes a criminal, and then becomes complicit in deaths. How much you could say she killed someone, I don't know if you'd say that, but she's very culpable in at least one death, and is largely culpable in the broader sense because of the people that she's associated herself with. So you get to about halfway through the season, and she's really feeling the weight of like, whoa, crap, what have I done? Like, my choices have sent someone to prison that wasn't really guilty, or like he didn't deserve what he got. They're charging him with stuff that he didn't necessarily do. People are dead. I'm a criminal. And there's even a scene where Han Solo like goes off on her and like, you are so selfish, entitled, you're a bad person. And she's like absorbing that, like, crap, I'm a bad person. Like, what? And she's even asking Xavier, like, am I a bad person? And he gives her a pep talk and lets us, the audience, know things he doesn't know, but kind of the answer in here, yeah, like she's kind of chosen to be a bad person. So this could be the opportunity for her to turn in the story. And it's at first it seems like it is, because she's like, I need to get out of this mess. And so she turns to her mother, turns to her friends, pulls her community together to get out of this mess. But to be clear, in this show, it's not the story of her becoming a hero to save her community. She becomes the hero to stop the problem that she created for herself and her family. There's no motivation to stop the hood to protect the city, or make right the people that she's robbed or anything like that she's committed crimes against. It's literally just, there's someone out to get me because I got intertwined with a criminal. This is not even the story of her becoming a hero. It's just the arc of she's learned to ask for help. So she turns to the people closest to her to actually help her, builds this better suit, infuses it with magic. And so we're able to overcome the hood, the immediate conflict that's threatening her. And then it becomes abundantly clear what we're watching in the final sequence, where she's tempted once again by Mephisto, who puts in front of her, I can give you what you want. And instead of her growing and saying, I need to let go of the past, I need to move on and figure out what that looks like. What does moving forward look like? Instead of that, she's still living in the past. She has the moment where she says that you move on. Like, she says it. She looks at the past and goes, that's still defines me. I lost her. And loss is part of life. That you can't cheat it. You can't avoid it. You can't work around it. That people will die. You will die. I will die. And that's part of life, is learning to process that and move on. In my own life, my personal life, I did not have good coping mechanisms, and at times turned to alcohol, and it turned me into alcohol. I had to go to rehab in my own destructive way, that I didn't learn the lesson of how to process death. It was more complicated than that, but certainly that was an element to it. As we have this character that's on this journey, that's the season, you think it's about her learning to let go and move on. The final moment, we're in this, she has to choose. What am I going to do with this? And once again, what was her other flaw at the beginning of it? She's impulsive. She cuts corners. She cheats to try to rush to the outcome that she wants, tied to this trauma in the past. And in the last moment, someone promises to break the rules of the universe to overcome her trauma by bringing back the dead. We're going to cheat. And she makes the same choice that she made at MIT, the same choice when she chose to work with the Hood and sold people out. She makes the same choice. I'm going to cut corners, driven by the same thing, her trauma of the past. She fails to learn and grow. She fails to overcome this. It's the same choice. And it's the same choice that the villain of the show, the Hood, made. He couldn't overcome it. He couldn't stop down this path. And he keeps going. And she keeps going and chooses the same thing the villain made. She's not a hero. This is the tragedy of Riri Williams, where she literally becomes the villain of her own story. Now, it cuts off before we see where that goes. But all we know from what they did show us is she did not learn, she did not grow, she's still driven by the same trauma, and she still has the same fault, and she's become the villain, making deals with the devil. It's gotten me reinterpret the entire show, because if you're watching it thinking that this is a redemptive story like Iron Man, which is to say he's a warmonger, a womanizer, and then he sees the pain that he's causing and he changes. He becomes a different person. He changes his company, and he literally has to battle his own company to try and do better. And he's still flawed all throughout the movies, makes gigantic mistakes, accidentally creates Ultron. He still has his flaws, but he's trying to do better. He's trying to make it right. And this arc, we're told, Steve Rogers says, you're not the guy that would make the sacrifice play in Avengers. And then ultimately he does. And he did it multiple times too. But it's this very long redemptive journey for Tony Stark of him trying to be a better person and not being defined by the choices of his past. That's not what Ironheart is. It's like the final moment could not make it more clear that this is so not that journey. And maybe it will be, but it's not. And you can't call her a hero just because she defeated the problem that she created, where she caused trouble with a criminal. She has to stop the person threatening her family. She didn't learn and grow. It's a tragedy. She's not a hero, at all. Right now, she's literally someone making a deal with the devil to bring back the dead, which has so many horrific implications to it. I was watching the last couple episodes, and you see the reaction of the brother when he sees the Natalie AI, and I started thinking through the discussion we have online about AI and cinematic revival, bringing back the dead for performances with AI, and how horribly offended people are that Christopher Reeve shows up in The Flash as Superman, and other similar ones like this. Huge discussion of is it morally right to bring back the dead with AI to put them in a movie? Now you play that out. This is a dramatically more offensive and dangerous thing than that, which is a fabricated version of a character based off one person's memories of them. That there's an AI pretending to be a dead person, but it's not, because you didn't do a brain scan of Natalie. This is Riri's memories creating her envisioned version of her and presenting it to others as her. There are so many sketchy, if you stop and think about his reaction, the brother's reaction, his first one was very much the right reaction to that in this context, the way it played out. And the show doesn't really spend enough time on the moral implications of that. But there's all these things that make it very clear Riri is not the hero in this story. She's another one of the villains, and she could have turned to become the hero, and she doesn't. So I'm trying to process what I think of that, because it's a bold choice. It's an interesting choice in the MCU, because that's obviously not what we normally do. That's not the direction these things normally go. And does it work? And when you don't understand what you're watching until the final moment, it creates like this very strange, like, okay, like, would I enjoy this more if I understood I was watching that? Because like when you're watching Breaking Bad and Goodfellas and stuff like that, you know that you're watching the story of a bad person, and it's kind of fun to watch their rise, but you also know they're not going to win in the end. Like, you know this can't sustain and horrible things are going to come from this. When you're watching a show that it's called Ironheart and keeps referencing Tony Stark, and it's in the MCU, you assume the genre. You assume this is a kind of part of her origin story, because she was in Black Panther 2 working with Black Panther with Shuri and trying, like, you assume she's one of the good guys. You don't assume that she's Walter White, that she's going to make a deal with the devil, that she's going to perpetually choose crime. And so watching it through the first time is like just really frustrating, because it's like, what is this? How am I supposed to root for this character? Why would I want any of this to happen? And in the end, you're like, oh, it's because it's a tragedy. But part of the problem is I think there's some just like kind of, as I said in my quick review last week, there's some just lazy bad writing in there that, like when the villain's plot is to create a paper trail back to themselves and become the largest stakeholder in a bunch of companies. This is this is nonsense. Like, put a gun to someone's head, sign these papers so I'm a shareholder, better not tell the cops. What? It's nonsense. And so when you're not able to, like, when there's flaws in the writing and characters aren't as compelling as they should be, the tragedy is more frustrating than it is compelling. That was my experience with this show. It does play rather different when you understand what you're watching. And I think in light of the final choice in the way Mephisto is used, like, I went into the last episode as like, we're going to do what the Mephisto reveal at the end. We're going to do a Kingpin thing again, where the most interesting character shows up at the finale, and so feels underdeveloped. And that's kind of true, but in this context, because it doesn't, the reason the reason it works is because you realize this is not the story of overcoming the main villain. It's not a story of defeating Mephisto. It's literally the tragedy where she teams up with the villain. That's the conclusion. And you go, oh, well, I'm watching something very different than I thought I was watching. I don't know where they're going with this, and I don't know if it'll get the numbers that they're going to be able to continue with this, but this is not like the rest of the MCU. This is something way different. And that's interesting, but I don't know that I really enjoyed it at all. And understanding that it is the tragedy, it is this tale of her giving into her worst tendencies and making a deal with the devil, certainly makes me reinterpret everything. That doesn't mean that I necessarily liked it. It's a compelling version of something that was very frustrating to watch. But I don't know. Like they literally, to make it so abundantly clear that we're not telling you that she's the hero. She's not like the Iron Man at all. She decided to deal with the devil to bring back the dead. Woo! What a choice. So anyway, let me know your thoughts down below. I'm sure the discourse will be entirely reasonable on this one, as it's been for the last 2 years. Keep talking movies and TV too much. Bye-bye.